if you don't get those short-term goals right, I think it becomes well nigh impossible to achieve the medium to longer-term goals, because quite frankly, you will go out of existence as a business. And every time you achieve little objectives, it's basically you are building muscle. You are building muscle as a business. And every little achievement then emboldens you to embark on more as you go forward.
Welcome to Old Mutual's BDT's Legacy Series. Hey guys, I'm Timothy Maurice, your behavioral psychology author. I can't tell you how much partnering with BDT to bring you the hearts and minds that are reshaping our financial landscape, how much of a pleasure it has been. In this series, we will hone in on what it takes to build a legacy business, from marketing to the entire ecosystem of strategy. Welcome to the Legacy Series. Meet Thulani Khanyile, a seasoned entrepreneur and strategic thinker whose insights into business continuity and long-term planning have guided many through growth and transformation. Sit back and enjoy.
Hi, my name is Thulani Khanyile, a serial entrepreneur in financial services, construction, and critical metals in recent years. My company is called Gear Capital, and under that I have a number of other entities which are involved in different aspects, business aspects within the SADC region. And I'm here as part of the Old Mutual BDT Legacy Series. I think it would be fair to say it goes back to when I was a child in the 70s, where I came from a family that was very enterprising. And so we sold all manner of things, from firewood to vegetables to chicken. So we had a broiler making facility also. And so as part of the family and as a child, we would sell. And so those roots go back that far. But in my own personal capacity, I would say that my entrepreneurial journey goes back some 30 years now. And I started off, which was essentially at the turn of democracy in our country. And having been, like many people, an activist as a youngster and throughout my life, I then felt that the value that I could make, my contribution, would be in using business as a way to advance social upliftment. And in later years, I then also said it's also about how we use business in ways that are consonant with the wider environment, so that we are able to conduct business in ways that enable our own progeny to meet their own needs in the future. And so over these last 30 years, essentially I've been involved in construction, where we were building for indigent households, working closely with the Mandela government at the time, and then went on with others to help to build a startup in education finance, so as to make funding available for people to pursue higher education in our country. And then in later years, my focus has been very much on energy, critical metals, especially, and food. So that's a very interesting question. And early on in my working career, in the startups, in property development, as well as education finance, I headed the marketing function, amongst other things that I did. And so that helped me to appreciate the importance of building a brand and marketing the work that we do, but also critically doing work so well that the previous customers would speak well and do a lot of the marketing for you. So I thought that is the right way to go. and it's far cheaper also if you are getting by word of mouth marketing of your business rather than just spending and spending and spending. So it made me appreciate the importance, yes, of building a brand for the sake of visibility and acquiring further business. But it also, if you'll allow me, Devi, made me appreciate something else, which is that building a brand is one thing. And you've got to be, of course, very intentional about the brand that you build and what that brand represents. But for all of that, it also meant to me that there was a far more basic question that would need to guide us, which is what are the values that undergird that brand? And once you've defined those values, how then do you behave in a manner that is consonant with that brand proposition? And so it means that in your own personal level, you have to behave in ways that are consistent with that brand. But it also means, even as a business, you've got to show up and be equal to the brand proposition that you have developed. And I think that is an equally important aspect of building the business and effecting good strategy for the business. Visibility, creating values and appreciating the value of values, if I can put it that way. The values that undergird that particular brand, and being seen to walk that talk, as it were. So, that's a different approach, and allow me to digress in that way. Because in a wider sense, it's not only then about marketing and visibility and effective business strategy, but it's also just about the importance of values and ethics in what we do. Because if those things are correct, then many of the other things do take care of themselves. I hope that makes some sense. As for strategic decisions that have helped us grow sustainably, I would think of a few things, and allow me just to share them in no order of importance. One is I've always been a great follower of history, and I try to read a lot and observe society and how people do things across the world. So I think that's something I think that has served me well, where I try to think outside of our own pond, if you will, in South Africa. And that always you're looking at the global perspective to inform how we better do what we do in South Africa and within other parts of the continent. So that sense of following closely and reading and constantly wanting to learn what happens elsewhere. That's the first thing. The second thing is also I am a big believer in the notion that if you are going to achieve some level of expertise in a given field, you need to immerse yourself for thousands of hours within that. And so reading and observing goes a long way, and writing and researching. And so I try to do that. Probably I would say that at least equivalent of one day, at least in a week, that it's just put to conceptual work. But I generally, I sleep little, so a lot of that happens in the wee hours of the night when I do that. So I think also just to be able to read and to reflect in quiet spaces is of utmost importance in my journey. The third element which I would cite is looking at the global perspective. One of the things I enjoy doing is to follow the annual conferences of the Communist Party of China. And this is not so much a political call as it is about looking at a country which 50, 60 years ago was a poor country, and within that period has become the second largest economy and on track to become the world's largest economy. So what is it that they do and they've done differently? And so I see that when I listen to their annual conferences, and you see them take stock not only over their work in the preceding year or 5 years, 10 years, but where they are quite intentional about what their country will look like in 10 years' time, in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time, even in 300 years' time. And so that is just quite phenomenal that people can think in such a long-term way and then reduce it to bite-sized chunks of what you need to do in the next year, in the next 5 years, in the next 50 years, in order to achieve those visions, so that those visions do not just become dreams in and of themselves, but there's the capability also to realize that and to be very specific and define short-term, medium-term, long-term objectives. So I think vision also, you see, is a critical issue, and the ability to execute. And I think those are two sides of the same coin. And that's absolutely critical for us to be able to do. The last point I would make for now is that in whatever businesses we are in, or even governments or organizations in civil society, that for me it is quite instructive that many of the most successful economies in the world do not necessarily are not endowed necessarily with great resources, but often they invest, and that's the difference, they invest in their human resources. So that becomes a key point of differentiation, to invest in our people and to understand that we are going to achieve competitive advantage through people. So the issue of skills development is completely non-negotiable. And the issue of building an environment, an enabling environment for people to function optimally is critical. And so that also then means treating your employees and colleagues right, and so that they have a sense of belonging, they are happy, they are incentivized, and they've got scope for further education and training. And through all of that, they see that through the investment in them, they are then able to give of their best selves in building the organization. And so I would say that's really critical, because as you do so, you are then creating an ecosystem of excellence, if you will. I've had the very interesting maxim that posits that if you want to go fast, you must go alone. But if you want to go far, then you must take others with you. So the importance of working with others, so whether they are your employees, they are your stakeholders, or entities that you do business with, Ubuntu reminds us of the need to work in a way that is synergistic, in a way that seeks always to promote mutual benefit. So I think we need to make sure that ultimately you have the architecture, the correct architecture in place within the organization in order for it to perform optimally. And at the risk of repeating myself, but I think it's an important point, where then you say that our most critical asset is our people. So the people we work with, whether within the organization itself or all the different stakeholders that we need to work with, even outside of ourselves, in order to meet the objectives of the business. You then have to have an ecosystem in place. And for that, people come first. So I think then effectively the human resources architecture, if I can call it that way, if I can call it that, is absolutely key. So that would be the first issue. That would be the first issue. The second one is also a very painful one, which I've seen in the course of my work over the years. That in order to succeed, so many businesses fail. The majority of businesses that are started fail. And if you look at those which are sustainable and successful in a sustainable way, also resources are at the heart of it. So I've spoken of human resources, but also it's important that you are able to build the relationships with investors, with bankers, because without finance, all the best ideas in the world for business will come to naught. And so funding is the oxygen of a business. So I think also that is an infrastructure that you want to assemble and make sure it is in place to undergird the development of that business. Thirdly, I guess I would say this would apply whether you are talking of business or any social formation or political formation for that matter. Leadership is key. And that's something that you see on a micro level within a household. How people are raised and the leadership of your parents and older siblings and so on. How that creates an environment for you to learn certain values and to grow. But you see that even in a country setting, and we even see it in our own country currently, that the importance of having leadership and the right leadership is absolutely critical. And so people who are imbued with strong leadership qualities, who are imbued with an ethical perspective on things, I would say that applies as much to government as it does to business, as it does to society. So I come back also once more to the issue of values. And then the last thing I would say for now is also the importance of simplicity. That in many ways, the most successful businesses have a simple idea, and it's about how you implement that idea rigorously, learn the lessons, fail where you must fail, pick yourself up, learn from those lessons, and use that failure and the lessons learned as your fire to drive you to greater success. So I think that also is absolutely critical. For now, those would be the first things that come to mind. So it really has been one of the privileges of my life to have served as a trustee on the BDT. And that in my own modest way, together with the other colleagues on the trust, that we are able to pay it forward by doing our bit to facilitate the entry and development of entities in the financial services sector, and giving a particular support, especially to women and Black folk in the course of our work, so that we are then able to essentially use our resources, and sometimes in partnership with other entities that were able to find greater reach, to make the sector in which Old Mutual works a lot more inclusive. So inclusion and achieving diversity is an important aspect of our work, and to literally open the doors to those who otherwise would struggle to secure support elsewhere. So we are very, very mindful of the fact that many of those who approach us have got young businesses, and in many instances, not the track record that would enable them to go to banks and other investors to support them. And so where we are really mindful of trying to support the vision, and as we support the vision really from the get-go, before there's any other value in the business, we are supporting the vision of that entity, but we are also looking at the founder or founders of that entity and saying, are these people that we can back? Because ultimately that's what we are doing. We're backing those individuals, because often then there isn't a business to speak of at that early stage. So to look at the track record of those individuals who are founding this concern or are building this concern, to understand the extent to which they, as individuals, have immersed themselves in their work in the sector, and therefore bring a certain expertise which, funding permitting, would enable them to create meaningful and lasting enterprises that employ others in the process. So, years ago, I learned of a merry Indian maxim that posits that it depends on the rider if the horse trots well. And I just found that profound and yet simple. So the jockey is all important in how fast that horse trots. And so it's about backing individuals, backing people who otherwise would have fallen through the cracks in terms of the normal ecosystem of funding for support. And where in many instances then we actually take a view that even if we started off as a loan, at a certain point we'll say, and a certain portion must be a grant, because we understand what these folks are doing and they're doing well, but they need a leg up. And so how then do we assist them to have a more enabling environment in which to flourish, and to look at support again further down the line. So it's about letting people in. In the 60s, there is a beautiful song that was sung by Mama Miriam Makeba and another elder, Harry Belafonte. And the song was actually Cape Town. It was entitled Cape Town. And it was about letting me in, Cape Town, let me in, let me in. So it was a song about embracing others, about becoming an ever more inclusive space. And so I would say that is as true of Cape Town as it is of any endeavor in society, including in this instance the financial services space within which we operate. How do we support not only economic development, but bring in new players and support the emergence of new players and those historically who were marginalized to come to the center and to sit at the top table? It's about how we assist one another to become our own liberators. That's a great question. And one is really dependent on the others. And so I would say, with my own experience, good and bad, if anything comes to mind, it is the importance of, if you like, getting the knitting right. And for me, that means that the short term goals are achieved. So you achieve the short term goals, you are generating cash flow, you are building a business, you are learning lessons, and where you are failing, the business is still young enough that the failures are not catastrophic, and you are able to build resilience, as it were. And so it's only when the business has got cash flow that you are then able to look at the really transformational stuff for the medium to long term wealth creation, if you will. But if you don't get the first part right, the short term goals, then you are unlikely to have the wherewithal to achieve the medium to longer term goals. So it's absolutely critical that you engage in an exercise early on to identify the key short term goals, because those give you the oxygen, those give you the runway to build a consequential business for the long term. If you don't get those short term goals right, I think it becomes well nigh impossible to achieve the medium to longer term goals, because quite frankly, you will go out of existence as a business. But the other reason why short term goals are so critical initially is that those generally will be more modest objectives than the longer. But the other reason why short term goals are so critical initially is that those generally will be more modest objectives than the longer term objectives. And every time you achieve little objectives, it's basically you are building muscle. You are building muscle as a business. And every little achievement then emboldens you to embark on more as you go forward. And as you do that, as you go forward, and as you do that, it also becomes critical to celebrate those victories. You know, starting businesses from scratch is often very painful and stressful. And so it's important to make time to celebrate the little wins, however modest. But you celebrate those because then it puts fire in your belly. And as I say, it emboldens you to go forward. But as you do that, you are also celebrating your staff and your colleagues and your various stakeholders for each of those little wins. And that's a critical thing to do. As I say, you are then building memory, as it were. You are building muscle, as it were, in order to develop your business for the medium to long term. So I think it's absolutely critical that you should be able to break down your objectives into immediate short-term goals, medium-term goals and long-term goals, and to understand specifically the resources that you need to put behind the attainment of each, and to make sure you are able to achieve as many of them as you can, because you won't achieve all of them. But if you are achieving many of them, you get better at it as time goes on. So continue to invest in that and have a short-term, medium, and long-term view. So resilience becomes absolutely critical. Understand that failure, much as it can be debilitating, it is part of the journey. It is part of the process. And it's how you look at it. And I say over time, you learn that it's also an important aspect of learning and growth, that at some point you're going to fail. And often failure is a better teacher than success in your business. So embrace that failure, if you will, and learn the lessons from it in order not to repeat the same failures into the future, but to grow from them and learn the lessons. And that also cuts both ways, that at a certain point you then must decide that certain things are not working, and how then do you dispense with those that do not work and not stubbornly cling to things for their own sake. So it's also about being very strategic on what you learn, what you take forward, and what you leave behind in the process. That's part of life, as it is a part of business or anything that you do. Failure is an important teacher.